And one thing we will take a couple of minutes at the beginning of class. Last week, after class ended, a few people stuck around, and we had a good conversation about this assignment, the project. So let me bring up in Classroom the link that says Model to Follow. That, if it will behave right, what it should bring up, I will quit that. That will bring up a Google document that gives you an example, and it thinks that I am not logged in. Hold on while I switch drives. Let's see. Model to Follow right there. What I did for the assignment is I took the Charlie Brown comic strip, and I took the character Linus, who has the security blanket, and I started the assignment as though I were taking this class and I was Linus. So you write a first paragraph that's about, this is the person I have the conflict with, and these are a few details of my relationship with that person. That will be the same for everybody. This is the person I have the conflict with. This is the relationship I have with that person. But then what I did for my second paragraph for this example is I picked goals. Because 3 weeks ago, we had a class meeting that was about the topic goal, the relationship goal, the identity goal, and the process goal. We have since then talked about power. We've talked about close relationships, relational dialectics. We've talked about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. For this second paragraph, you can pick anything. And your paragraphs will not necessarily look the same as each other's. You're defining what conflict it is here. Then in this paragraph, you pick something we talked about in class, and you apply what we talked about in class to the paragraph you to the conflict that you defined here. Then you're going to write a third paragraph with something else we talked about in class. So you might do this one about power. You might say, I have a conflict with my little sister, and here's how it is a power struggle. And if we had handled power differently, we might have had an easier time with the conflict. Then you might come down here and say, my sister and I have a problem managing the relational dialectics. She wants to be together. I want some time apart. Here's what we do. You can pick anything in the class. You just need to apply it to the conflict you defined up here in your first paragraph. So everybody's first paragraph will look pretty much the same. But after that, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, you pick from anything in the class. Now I'm going to pause here, and I am going to hope that you will give me the Christmas present of asking me questions about this assignment. Ryusan has sensed that I'm being silly in calling that a Christmas present. Yes, Yagi-san.
Sure, again, so you mean on the paragraph 2 and 3, second and third,
right.
We need to pick up kind of 2 theory from the classes,
right.
Classes,
Right.
And then connect to the first paragraph.
Exactly. The first paragraph is, this is the conflict I'm talking about. Then paragraph 2 and paragraph 3 are any topic we've talked about in here. It doesn't have to be something that was a whole class meeting. I used goals, and that was a whole class meeting. But you could use, last week we talked about the relational dialectics. That wasn't a whole class meeting, that was one topic. That would be fine. Anything. That was a helpful question. Do we have any others? So I started off today saying, We are ready for there to be a holiday. And here is something, after almost 30 years of teaching college, I have adopted the habit that when it is the last class meeting before a holiday, I try to schedule something that day that is important, that we need to understand, but that's not that difficult. So what we're talking about today is negotiation. Most other days I've come in here, I introduce some ideas, and then I do the comparison between American conflict style and Asian conflict style. So we've talked about face negotiation over and over again. Today, I'm just giving you an 8-step process. This is what I teach and have taught to my students in the United States for 13 years. You might have thought once or twice, coming to this class, I thought he said he teaches communication. We haven't really talked that much about communication. Well, I would say when you have a problem with conflict, that means that communication is breaking down. But today, we are going to talk about when you have a stubborn or difficult conflict. What you do, a good process to follow to talk to the other person about that conflict, is this negotiation process. 2 more things to say before we get started. First, this is not something I made up. These are not my opinions. This all comes out of research. It is a big, thriving research agenda in the West to examine how people behave in conflict, and when we see there is something you can do that helps, to try to research that to learn how to do it better and better. The second thing is, I think maybe that a lot of these behaviors will seem very unfamiliar, maybe even a little unnatural, because this is how Westerners come right out and talk about the conflict. So, the 8 steps. Step number, I almost got ahead of myself, and I just realized I've been talking all this time and I didn't have my notes set up at all. So bear with me for a moment or two, because I just realized this device has signed me completely out, and until I sign back in, I'm not going to be able to see my notes. And if you have to listen to me for the next hour and 20 minutes talking with no notes, it may not seem like a worthwhile use of your time. Technology deciding not to behave in the middle of a presentation is no fun, but is not anything to panic over, because we are in charge, not the technology. This now wants to do 2-step verification. That is supposed to keep me safe, but I still wish it wouldn't do it. There. Back I go to make sure that the recording is still recording. Not that. Bump, bump. The recording is still recording. Here are my notes. Here are my notes. Oh gosh, now you want to get logged in. This is technology's Christmas present to me. I wish that I could return it. Come on. And what do you want to bet in a moment it's going to make me do 2-step verification for this as well? Boom, 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 boom. Is it? Come on. There we go. All right. So the thing that I almost started without doing, today's essay question. It's similar to one we had a couple of weeks back. Take a conflict, and it could be the one you use for the project. That would be fine. And narrate how you could negotiate it and label the 8 steps as you do it. So the 8 steps will begin with step number 1. Step number 1 is take stock of your own emotions. Begin by thinking about this conflict you have with this other person, and what emotions do you have in connection with it, and are those emotions out of control? Now a reminder, and I'll remind you a bunch of times today, this is what I teach to American college students. So I say to them, if you're really angry, so angry you can't think straight, or if you don't like conflict and you know you need to talk to the other person but you feel really afraid, or maybe there's something that you hoped was going to happen and it didn't, and now you feel sad or disappointed. The point is not that emotions are bad and you need to get rid of them, because we can't do that. That's a longer talk. But the point is, if your emotions are so out of control that you can't think clearly, then you need to manage the emotions first. That may mean go to someone who's very supportive of you and get help settling down your emotions and making them manageable. But that is the first step, because you need, as you proceed through this, to be thinking clearly. Step 2, state the issue. State the issue. And there is a phrase that students who take my conflict class, they memorize this phrase and they can reel it off at high speed. Voluntary behavior, present moment forward. Voluntary behavior, present moment forward. Done quickly, it is voluntary behavior, present moment forward. The first thing about it is, you can only negotiate over things that are voluntary. There's a professor whose office is right next to mine. I don't know what she is allergic to, but she's allergic to something. Every few minutes, not here in Japan, back in the United States, every few minutes she sneezes loudly. It's very distracting. But I can't negotiate with her about it. Sneezing is not voluntary. She's not in control of it. Little by little, I have learned to tune it out, to not pay attention to it. That's an example of something, it makes a problem for me, but we can't negotiate. It's not voluntary. She can't help it. We also, at my university, a few years ago, had a student who used a wheelchair, a powered wheelchair that had a very loud engine. And the student needed the wheelchair. The student could not control the fact that that chair made a lot of noise. So if that makes a problem for other people, you can't negotiate over that. What you can negotiate is over voluntary behavior. A few other things you cannot negotiate over. You can't really negotiate over people's emotions. And I have heard in conflict negotiation, I've heard people try. I've heard people say things like, don't be angry. Well, you don't choose to be angry, so that's not voluntary behavior. But what you could do is you might say, don't yell at me. Yelling is voluntary behavior. Behavior, we say, because sometimes when people start talking and negotiating about the conflict, they will make the issue the other person's personality or their character. So they might say something like, don't be lazy. Don't be selfish. Well, those are not behaviors. That's a pattern of behavior. You might say, if you see that there's only one slice of bread left in the loaf of bread, please don't take it. That's a behavior. And that is something you can negotiate over better than don't be selfish. Present moment forward. That just means you cannot negotiate over the past. If what has your feelings hurt is something that happened in the past, you have to stop and think, what do I want the other person to do about it now? If you loaned them something of yours and they broke it, and the conflict to you is, they broke something I own, well, that's the past. They can't undo it. You might say, I would like for you to replace it. I would like for you to pay for it. And that is voluntary behavior, and it's in the present or in the future. But you can't negotiate over things that already happened. It is generally a good idea to write it down. One thing I may not have been completely clear about in introducing this step, you are not yet talking to the other person. This is still something you do when you're on your own. Before you go to the other person is when you do this. It would be a good idea then to write it down as voluntary behavior, present moment forward, and say to yourself, yes, this is what I think this conflict is about and what we're going to negotiate about. So then step 3. Identify your goals. Identify your goals. When you go and talk to the other party to the conflict, what is it that you want? Now, the day 3 weeks ago when we talked about goals, we began with the topic goal. And at this point, the topic goal should be very clear to you because that's what you came up with in step 2. When you said, please pay for the thing of mine that you broke. When you feel angry, please don't yell at me. Those are the topic goal. But you should also ask yourself and think hard, do you have a relationship goal? Do you have an identity goal? I've kind of already mentioned a process goal with my example, when you're angry, please don't yell. But take complete stock of it and be sure you have thought about and you understand what it is you want when you meet with the other person. All right, you still have not met with the other person yet. Step 4 is decide. Decide. Are you going to go and have the conversation with the other person? Make up your mind whether you're going to do it. Some of the things to ask yourself. What's going on right now? Is this the right time to do it? Is there a place where we will be able to talk? Don't let this be an excuse to put it off, but do consider maybe the other party to this conflict has a lot on their mind. Maybe something recently has happened to them to where they are in no shape, they are not in good condition to have that conversation with you. Maybe there's no place where the two of you could get together and talk. But if it is the right time, and if you can think about where you would have the conversation, then if you decide to go ahead, well, actually, hold on. What people sometimes get stuck on at this stage, commonly people get stuck on, is they'll think. They'll have done all the first 3 steps, and then they'll have a moment where they say, you know what? This is so small, this is so minor, it's not worth bringing up. But one of the things the research says if you are in any kind of relationship with someone, not just family, not just romantic, this is also true for workplace relationships, and you've never worked through a conflict with them, the little ones are great. The little ones are a good opportunity. Because if you wait until there's a big conflict, and for the first time you have to have a conversation this difficult and this delicate, it becomes much, much more likely to go badly. If you take a little problem and you go through all of this, then you and that other person have in your memory, we worked through a conflict together and they were reasonable and they were nice and we succeeded and I know I can talk to this person. So if you get stuck thinking, this is so minor, I don't want to bring it up, take that thought and turn it upside down and say, this conflict is so minor that it's good practice, so let's do it. All right. The fifth step sometimes seems like it's one of the most unimportant, most trivial, but believe it or not, of the 8 steps we're going to talk about, a ton of research has been done on this, and there is a powerful consensus among conflict researchers. This is one of the most common and biggest mistakes people make. So, you've already done the first 4 steps. You've already managed your emotions. You've defined what the conflict is. You've thought about your goals. And you've made up your mind whether you want to proceed. And then let's say, in my imagination, I've done all this. And I walk up to Yagi-san. And I say, we need to have a talk about that backpack of yours. That backpack bothers me. That's my made-up conflict. Now, at this moment, I've thought so much about this conflict, and she hasn't thought anything about it at all. Do you remember 2 weeks ago when we talked about power? And one of the things that makes conflict management go badly is when power is not balanced. And when you've thought carefully about the conflict, and you walk up to them and you start the conversation, and they have not thought about it, your power is up here, theirs is down here. And there's a word that shows up over and over again in the conflict research. I don't know how well it translates, but I'll define it for you. That word. Ambush refers to jumping out and surprising someone. And when you approach someone and say, we have this problem. We are roommates, but you play your music too loud. We are family members, but you make comments that I think are insensitive and I want you to stop making them. And you've thought about the issue and they have not, and you've just sprung it on them. What the research says is don't ambush them. There's a right way to approach them and a wrong way to approach them. And when you approach them the wrong way, that's one of the most common mistakes that makes this go badly. So what is the right way? First of all, go to them privately, if possible, face to face. It's not that good of an idea to text them or to send them a line message. It's something best done in a face-to-face conversation. What you then do is you say, there's something that the two of us need to work on. There is a problem I have been thinking about, and if the two of us talk it over and work something out, I think we will both be happier. But this is the important part. This is what stops you from ambushing them. You say, when do you have time later this week? When do you have time tomorrow? You should be very, very unwilling to talk about it right then. Instead, you tell them what the issue is. You tell them what you came up with in step 2, and you ask them to meet with you later, so they have time to think about it. So, if I were to say, Yagi-san, next Wednesday morning I have office hours. Do you have any time then? In my imagination, you do. That backpack of yours really, really bothers me. And we need to talk about your backpack. Do you have time next week for us to talk? She now has a week to think about it, and she can ask me questions. Well, what's the problem with my backpack? And I can tell you. Then we part ways, and you think about it for a week, and then we talk. And that's something that levels power. Let them know what the issue is, and then let it cool. Let them think before you go any further. Now, sometimes they may say, well, let's talk about it right now. And if they're sure, if you ask them repeatedly and they're sure they want to talk about it at that moment, you can. I still think it's pretty dangerous. What I have done before in that situation is I tell them, right now I don't have time, so let's schedule a time later. Let me make sure that I am not forgetting anything else to say about the approach step. There is not. That brings us then, through the first 5 steps, the 2 absolute, the things you have to have in place for this to work. You have to have a problem that you can state as voluntary behavior, present moment forward. And then you have to have a partner who's willing to talk and available to talk. If you've got those 2 things, then you can proceed to step 6, negotiate. Step 6, negotiate. The first thing to say about the negotiation step, when you meet with the person, you need to come prepared. You need to be able to explain your view, your position. You need to have in mind some possible solutions to it. So maybe your roommate plays their music too loudly. You come to the meeting, you need to be able to say, your music being that loud makes a problem for me because. But I've thought about it, and what if we did this? Or what if we did this? What if you borrowed my headphones? What if we had 2 days a week where the apartment was a quiet zone so I could study, and then maybe 2 days a week where I find someplace else to study and you can blast your music in the apartment? How about that? Come with some solutions ready. But most importantly, more important than explaining your viewpoint, more important than possible solutions, you have to come ready to listen to their emotions, their interpretation, and their suggestions about how to solve it. That conversation will go badly if you show up and do all the talking. If you just say, the music's too loud, here's what we're doing, that will not go well. But if you say, this is my experience of it, now, what's yours? And then listen while they talk. Here are some ideas I have for what we could do. What are your ideas? And then sincerely listen. One really good practice is to start the meeting by thanking them for meeting with you. Thank them for meeting with you. Another reminder, this is what I'm teaching to my American college students. To them, It feels very strange to start this kind of meeting by thanking them. But I say there are two reasons that's helpful. First, when you thank someone, you admit they are doing you a favor, and that, in some sense, levels the power between you. It signals to them that you're not putting yourself above them. Secondly, if they come to this meeting and they are afraid, and sometimes they are afraid that you're angry and that this meeting is going to be a fight, and you started off by thanking them, the first thing out of your mouth is friendly and kind, and the tone is right. So start the negotiation by thanking them for meeting with you. Then, repeat to them what you came up with in step 2. The voluntary behavior, present moment forward, that is the problem for you. So maybe you say to a family member, sometimes you get angry at me, sometimes I get angry at you. We're both human beings. We both have normal emotions. But when you get angry at me, you really raise your voice and yell. And I get really upset. And I'm not asking you not to get angry. I am asking you not to yell. That is something that happens right after you thank them for meeting with you. This is the voluntary behavior, present moment forward. But that's when you say, I want for us, the two of us, to figure out something that works for both of us. And you ask them, be open to how they want to have this conversation. Ask them if they want to talk about their own perception. Ask them if they have a solution in mind. If they want you to explain more. Let them have some control over how this conversation goes. Once the conversation is underway, let it continue as long as either one of you is continuing to learn new things. You might talk about your emotions, how you feel when the conflict is going on. You might talk about how you interpret the other person's behavior or how they interpret your behavior. The point where you realize that the negotiation has gone on long enough is when you are starting to repeat yourself. When you're saying the same things that you've said before. If you notice the other person is saying the same things they've said before, then repeat those back to them. Make sure that you've understood them correctly. And it may be time to move to the 7th step. The 7th step is a contract. A contract. Now, a contract is not a piece of paper that two people sign. That's not a contract. A first-year law student could tell you that. You probably know a lot of married couples. I don't think any married couple would say the marriage license is the marriage. They would say the marriage is the years that we've spent together. The marriage is the understanding the two of us share. That's the same thing with a contract. What's written down is just a trick to help you remember the details. But a contract, it has a few necessary parts. And those parts are, it is specific. Both sides agree to it. It's specific, both sides agree to it, and it describes voluntary behavior, present moment forward. And I don't know if you are going to be entertained by this, maybe not. One of the guidelines that comes very clearly out of research is the more specific the contract is, the better. And then I have in my notes, and I wrote these notes in 2009, when it comes to friendships, you get tempted to be vague. You get tempted to talk broadly. And then I put in my notes, the Japanese, in their business contracts, are not as specific as Americans are in their business contracts. Because Japanese contracts, the culture says, you provide the broad framework of the agreement, and then you trust each other. You get to know each other, and you trust each other. In American business contracts, every detail is written out. Because you might have to take that contract into a courtroom and have a judge read it and tell the other side, this is what you have to do. That model, the American contract, where the details are spelled out, that's what the conflict research says as one of the closing steps of negotiation. Make very specific agreements. So not something like, so when it comes to playing loud music in our apartment, you're going to be more considerate. That's not a contract. But if you said, Mondays and Thursdays are my study days, and we will not play music out loud. Wednesdays and Saturdays are your music days. I go someplace else, you play the music as loud as you want. That's a contract. These are the days, this is the behavior, and we agree on it. One of the difficulties in the contract phase for Americans is that part where you get explicit agreements. What Americans have a bad habit of doing is they'll get all the way up to this stage and they'll say, well, I'll try. And it's important that you not let the negotiations stop there. The advice that a whole lot of conflict counselors will give is, you say to them at that moment, I know that you try, I know you have been trying, I know that you always try, but this conversation is not about trying. This conversation is about the two of us have both been trying. The fact that we have this conflict, that shows that our trying is not enough. We need to both agree on what we're going to do. And there's a story, a nice, I think, teaching story that a lot of my students have said helped them understand it. There was a boss. She was the manager. She had a lot of workers working under her. And one of her workers was late to work every day. And not 1 or 2 minutes late. He was 30 minutes. He was sometimes 60 minutes late. And she was getting close to thinking she would have to fire him. Because you can't show up to work 60 minutes late. So she had a meeting with him to find out, why are you late so often? And this is sad, so you may have to brace yourself. He was late so often because his wife had died. And they had a very young child. So he was now a single father. And he had not planned on being a single father. And he did not know how to get his child out of bed, get the child ready for school. Every day was difficult for him. And so what the boss did, what the manager did, she was a mother herself. She said, I'm going to teach you what to do. You lay out most of the things the night before, so everything's lined up and ready. And she taught him several more tricks. And then she said, will you do all of these things? Because this was her contract. Will you do all of these things? And he said to her, I'll try. And she said, you've been trying already. What I want to know is, next week, if you come to work late, I'm not going to yell at you, but I'm going to ask, have you been doing the things we agreed you would do? And if those aren't working, I'll help you. I'm a mom too. We'll think of more things that will work. But I need to know that you're going to do the things we've already agreed on. It's important that that happen in the contracting stage of a negotiation. At least when Westerners are negotiating with each other. All right. Stage 8, the final stage, is to follow up. Follow up. So you both agreed to what was going to happen. Maybe for 4 or 5 weeks, there are 2 days of the week where there's no music, 2 other days in the week where you can have all the music you want. And after about 5 weeks of that, stop a second and think about it and think, is this working? In particular, it's very important that you live up to what you agreed to, that you follow through on what you agreed to. If you said, I will do this, that you actually do it. It's also fairly important that you observe and pay attention to the other person's behavior. Now, sometimes my American students say, well, I don't want to feel like I'm watching them to see if they make a mistake. I don't want to act like I'm their mom or their teacher or their boss. This is my friend. And my answer to that is, if the other party to the conflict is doing a good job, you want to point out they're doing a good job and praise them and thank them for doing such a good job. And if there's one thing that comes out of social science, it's any behavior that you reward someone for, they will continue. And so if they're doing a great job on what you agreed to, and you reward them for it by praising them for it, that is going to make that solution work a lot better. Now, sometimes what you agreed to doesn't work. Sometimes the contract breaks down. And what the research tells us is that is normal. And the important thing is not to panic. This was a challenging situation in the first place, or you wouldn't have gone through all this. Most conflicts take more than one attempt to solve. So all you do is go back to defining the behavior as it is now, take a few minutes and think about your goals, approach them, and have another talk. Just run the process through again. Now, if it happens multiple times, if you reach an agreement and then it falls apart, so you talk again and you reach another agreement and it falls apart, you have to ask yourself, are we at least getting better? Are we making progress? One of the difficulties that my American students commonly have, because they've watched a lot of TV shows and a lot of movies, they think that problems in relationships get solved in about 1 hour. And what they have to learn is, sometimes it takes months, sometimes it takes years, and you do it in little steps. You find something to do that's better than what you were doing before. But it's not quite good enough, so you talk again, and you learn how to do a little better, and a little better. And you keep talking to each other and trying to do better until a day comes that you say, you know what? We've solved it. But you don't do it in one try necessarily. While you are in this stage, the follow-up stage, this is a good place to address any hurt feelings. We said all the way back at the beginning of this class that most of the conflicts that are difficult to deal with are difficult because either the two sides don't trust each other or the two sides' emotions have gotten in the way. If you've agreed on some behaviors to do differently and you are in the stage of trying to make your solution work and following up, that's the point where you can talk about any hurt feelings. That's where you may have to work on forgiving the other person if the conflict involved you being hurt really badly. All right. So let me see if I have forgotten anything. It would appear that I have not. So, let me just jump back. If I can get this to work right. So the 8 steps, I'm not going to jump back through the slides again. But the emotions, state the issue, monitor your goals, decide whether you want to proceed, approach them, have the negotiation, reach a contract, and then follow up. And if you were to get the essay question associated with today, you take your conflict, it could be the one you use for the project, or you could pick another one, doesn't matter to me. But you just write an imaginary, or a real one if you actually did this, what would the negotiation look like, and label each of the 8 steps. Now I'm going to stop talking here for a minute, and I would like for you to look at what you have written down, if anything, from today. And any questions that you have, this is a good moment for them.
I have a question on second
Yes.
state issue.
Right.
So you mentioned that we can negotiate about pattern of voluntary behavior,
Right.
but we cannot point out that person's personalities or characteristics.
Right.
But I thought selfish, and you defined the selfish
Right.
lazy are categorized by pattern of voluntary behavior.
Sure.
But I thought that lazy and selfish are also, can be counted as personality, that person's personalities or uniqueness or speciality. I thought, how can we distinguish that part? How can we define?
Well, lazy and selfish, they're not good things to negotiate over, because what are you negotiating over? Stop being selfish. Well, if they are selfish, there are probably 20 different things they do that are selfish, and they may not notice all of them. A lot of times, if people are lazy or have other character flaws, they don't know. They do those things, and they may need it explained to them. Someone may need to help them to understand, this is something else you do that's lazy. This is something else you do that's lazy. Whereas, let's imagine an imaginary student named Bob, who every day walks into this class 15 minutes late, making a lot of noise, and distracts everybody. And I say, Bob, quit being inconsiderate. Well, which is going to be more easy for Bob to understand? Quit being inconsiderate, or Bob, if you're going to walk in late, walk in quietly. I'm going to negotiate on when you walk in, do it quietly, because that gives Bob one thing to fix. Now, I think were asking me a different question, possibly, about how can you distinguish personality traits. So I don't think I hit your question dead on. Do you want to ask a follow-up?
How can we categorize about the difference of pattern of voluntary behavior?
Right.
That person's personality.
So, when you're negotiating, pick one thing that they do, not who they are. Because it may be that they could change who they are. It may be they could stop being selfish, but that could take years. Whereas this one thing that you do, making noise when you walk in, you could stop that now. And therefore, when you take a little step, and that's what you negotiate over, and they agree, okay, I see how this is important, I will be quiet when I walk into class. And then maybe you pick another behavior of theirs and you negotiate over that, and then a third and a fourth and a fifth. And over time, they become less selfish because they learn, oh, all these behaviors hurt other people. Okay, what they really want is for me to think about other people. But you do it one behavior at a time. And go ahead.
So my question is, I want to check the concept of ambush
Yeah.
in approach
Right.
method again. Could
Right.
you tell me what is ambush?
Ambush.
Approach?
Okay, so the word ambush generally means to try to be more powerful than another person by surprising them. So if I walked up to imaginary student sitting here, Fred, and I walk up to him and I say, let's fight. I didn't ambush Fred. But if Fred is sitting here taking notes and I walk up here to field some questions, and then I come back down here and I go, bam, and I hit Fred in the back of the head. And he didn't see the hit coming because I was behind him. I ambushed him. Now, to apply this to conflict, when you surprise someone, you are more powerful than they are. And Americans who are trying to negotiate a conflict very